The title of my presentation is I Understand What You're Saying, but I Don't Know How to Tell You That. A look at receptive bilingualism. So, I chose this topic because I'm a receptive bilingual myself, and even though I've done countless research on it during my time here at UGA, I feel like there's still a lot of people that don't know what it is, how it comes about, etc. So, I just wanted to bring knowledge to the topic. So first I'm going to go over some vocabulary that I'm going to be using throughout my presentation. The first one is active/productive bilingual, which is a person who both understands and speaks two languages and has active control over both languages. And then the next one is passive/receptive bilingual, who is a speaker who's had enough exposure in a second language to have a native-like comprehension but has little to no active control over that second language. Code switching is the practice of alternating between two or more languages in a conversation. And then, as we all know, L1 refers to a speaker's first language, L2 refers to a speaker's second language, and so on. And the last one is heritage language, which is a minority language that's learned at home as children, but is never fully developed because of insufficient input from the social environment. The speakers grow up with a different language, typically the majority language of where they live, such as English when we're in America, in which they become more competent. So, what is receptive bilingualism? As we know, it's somebody who's a speaker who's had enough exposure in a second language to have native-like comprehension, but they don't have much control over it in their second language, which means that if somebody is to speak to them in their heritage language, they can understand it, but they are not able to respond back in that language. It's not one size fits all and can look like many different things. For example, it could be somebody who understands someone speaking their heritage language, but they can't respond back in that language. Or it could be being able to respond back in that language, but in a very limited way. And it could also be being able to understand their heritage language, but not being able to translate it into their first language. So how does this relate to SLA? When we learn about SLA, even in the context outside of an SLA class, we're taught that the way that you know, to show that you know language is by speaking it. After all, that's what language is all about, right? But when it comes to receptive bilingualism, there's a disconnect that happens in our brains. We receive so much input vocabulary-wise, but since we don't give a lot of output in terms of speaking, over time it gets harder to do. This is where a lot of arguments about what's considered bilingual comes from, in the sense that a lot of people are bilingual and that they have two languages, they're hearing it every day, but since they can't speak it, does that mean that they're truly bilingual? And as we all know, there's always a lot of controversy with the SLA field. And so there are several factors that can contribute to receptive bilingualism. The first one is assimilation. And so a lot of parents, which brings me to my next topic also, a lot of parents thought that if they raised their child as bilingual, they would have a language delay, the child would have an accent, they would get bullied, fit in. So in order to fit in, they wouldn't teach their child their heritage language, just so that way they could have the typical American experience and grow up the normal way. I say that in quotes. And so another factor that can go into it is insufficient input, which is where the only people that speak their heritage language are at home or with friends, family, but they spend a majority of their time at school or with friends where everybody speaks a different language. And so code switching is something that you'll often see with somebody that's receptively bilingual. And so most of us know code switching in the context of switching the way that we talk with different people, such as how you talk to professor versus how you talk to your friends versus how you talk to your parents. But here I'm talking about how you switch within a sentence. This is used as a way to fill in the gaps between two languages due to a fluency or memory problem, and our brain does it automatically. There are a lot of English words that can't really be translated to one's native language, at least specifically with Yoruba, which is where I got most of my conversations for this presentation done. And code switching is a necessity in this case. And the same goes for translating one's native language into English, which is something I see a lot with my parents, where they'll often be talking strictly in English, and then they'll switch to Yoruba because they don't know the English word for it, or they'll be speaking strictly in Yoruba and they don't know the English word for it, so they have to kind of mix and match. And so one of my references that I looked at is titled Language Assimilation Today. Bilingualism persists more in the past, but English still dominates. And basically, it just talks about how about the way that immigration played into bilingualism. And I'll just read what it says. Because of renewed immigration, fears about the status of English as the linguistic glue holding America together are common today. Multiculturalists have expressed hopes of profound change to American culture brought on by the persistence of, across generations, of the mother tongues of contemporary immigrants. In either case, the underlying claim is that the past pattern of rapid acceptance of English by the children and grandchildren of the immigrants may be breaking down. Bilingualism is common among second generation children, i.e., those growing up in immigrant households. Most speak an immigrant language at home, but almost all are proficient in English. Among Hispanics, 92% speak English well or very well, even though 85% speak at least some Spanish at home. The equivalent percentages among Asian groups are 96% are proficient in English and 61% speak an Asian mother tongue. My next article is on being first generation Nigerian American, part 1. And so this one, basically, the author talked about her experiences growing up Nigerian in America and what that can mean in terms of identity and language. My parents did not anticipate the result of raising a Nigerian in America. This unidentified identity that is sometimes swept under the rug. I never fully had the American experience growing up in a Nigerian home, yet I never fully had a Nigerian experience because I grew up in America. How do I identify as a Black person when my direct roots are from Nigeria? Yet, I never fully had the Black experience because my parents are immigrants. There is something unique about the Black first generation American that other immigrants' families do not share, particularly because of the unique experiences of Blacks in America. There is a great disconnect. And so the author further talks about how she doesn't speak her native language at home because of how she grew up in America, etc., etc. And so for my presentation, I talked with some of my friends and we just sat in a room and just had a conversation about our language experience. And so I just kind of typed up what we talked about. So one thing we came to realize is that the environment we grew up in seemed to directly impact our second language acquisition process. So for some of us that grew up in multilingual communities where being bilingual is accepted and more common, we were more likely to be bilingual or to embrace our language and culture. And then those of us who grew up where being an immigrant or being from an immigrant home was weird or not as common, and they were like mostly at like a predominantly white school or predominantly their ethnicity school, they were more likely to reject their heritage, language, and culture, and they would try to assimilate to majority culture as much as possible. Every single person that I talk to hears their native language at home every day through conversations, movies, TV, music, and more. A majority of them can have very limited conversations when speaking their heritage language, but have a wide knowledge of the language in terms of vocabulary, grammar, syntax, pragmatics, all that stuff. And most of the people who were fluent in their heritage language had at least one person at home who didn't speak English at all, or they were born in a different country and moved here at a young age. And even though we all can't speak our native language fluently, there are some things that are hard for us to express in English because we only know it in our heritage language. Like there are certain phrases that don't directly translate, as I said earlier. So the main takeaways that I have is that receptive bilinguals are often left out of the conversation when it comes to bilingualism/multilingualism. The concept of passive bilingualism is proof that bilingualism is not linear and or one size fits all. It truly is just not all over the place, but there's definitely not a one size fits all, basically. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done on how or why this exists, especially from a neurological point of view and not just a social point of view. And even within receptive bilingualism, there are different ways that a person can fit in this group, and there are various levels within it. Like for me personally, I can read, write, and understand my second language, but I can't speak in it as fluently as I can do all the other stuff. And I have certain friends who are like, they can speak more than they can read or write, so there's just different levels. And so my last topic is basically just talking about the future of SLA in my personal opinion. I think that there are several ways that the future of SLA can go, with more people becoming aware of what receptive bilingual is and how to fix it, and then also the trend currently of the importance of keeping heritage languages alive and stopping them from going extinct. There could be a rise of more active bilinguals through future generations, But there could also be a decline of active bilinguals, with people wanting to assimilate more to wherever they move to, and or not having a way to speak their second language because there's not as many people who speak the language around them. And these are my references. I only used 3. And thank you for listening.